I don't need a kid," my father declared at the funeral, as the rest of the family looked at him in disbelief. "I'm getting remarried. This time to a younger and more attractive woman. Right, Michelle?" "Oh, John, you're so silly." Father embraced a woman named Michelle from among the employees. Michelle looked happy as she clung to my father's arm. "Do you even understand the situation right now?" "What?" "It's a day to celebrate. My old wife finally kicked the bucket." I glared at my father. Then Maria gently embraced my shoulder. "I'll take Sally with me. I won't pay child support." "That's fine," Maria declared that firmly, hugging me. From that day, I started living with my aunt and her husband. I didn't hear from my father at all, but a month later, he suddenly called. "Hey, help me out." "Who is this?" "It's your father." "My only father is Kent," I said, ending the call and blocking his number. No matter how much he cried or raged, my father's hell had just begun. I'll make sure he regrets it plenty. I'm Sally Manson, a 12-year-old middle schooler. Just a normal girl who loves her mother. Being an only child, I get to do whatever hobbies I like, and I think I have quite a bit of freedom. My mother is very kind and rarely gets angry. But when she does, she's really scary. However, I always think it's my fault for doing something bad. Other than that, we get along very well, often going shopping together on weekends. My real father is a man named John, a very irresponsible person. Even as a child, I wondered why my mother married him. Once, I asked her why. But she just smiled awkwardly and said, "You'll understand when you're older." Honestly, even as a middle schooler, I had no idea why my mother chose him. He was always out having fun, and I have no memories of playing with him. More often, he treated me coldly, and I hated him. But I didn't talk about it much, because it made my mother sad. Still, I had dreams about marriage. That's because my Aunt Maria and her husband were an ideal couple. Maria, my mother's twin sister. She is very kind and sometimes strict, and she dotes on me. She was my aunt, but to me, an only child, she was like a sister. And I adored her husband, Kent, as if he were my brother. They had no children. Apparently, due to an illness Kent had in the past, he couldn't have children. Kent was a childhood friend of my mother and Maria, so Maria knew about his illness and its aftermath. Still, when they decided to marry, my grandparents strongly opposed it, but Maria boldly went ahead with the wedding, my mother told me. So, until I was born, Maria and Kent were estranged from my grandparents. But my birth brought them back together, and now they have a great relationship. However, my father ridiculed Kent. He keeps saying unbearable things like calling him a failure for not being able to have children, or accusing him of marrying for an inheritance. That's why I despised my father and swore never to become an adult like him. Right after I started middle school, my grandparents threw a celebration party. Their house is enormous. They seem to be local landowners with several businesses. My mother, Maria, and Kent each run one of my grandparents' companies. In contrast, my father is just a regular employee in one of their companies. As a child, I found this odd. But seeing my father's behavior, even I, as a child, understood he could never be trusted with a company. Yet, it seemed to bother him a lot. At the party, while pouring a drink for my grandfather, he started talking nonchalantly. "Hey, maybe it's about time you let me run one of the companies, huh? It looks bad, you know, having the wife as the boss and the husband as a low-level employee." The previously warm atmosphere suddenly turned cold. I sighed and took a bite of my cake. My father, oblivious to the mood, continued. "Or maybe we could just swap positions, right? That would solve everything." "Let's not have such vulgar discussions at Sally's entrance celebration," my mother interjected. "What, vulgar?" my father yelled, and his voice echoed in the room. Seemingly due to the alcohol, my father appeared unable to control his emotions. In contrast to my calmly speaking mother, my father's aggressiveness was almost comical. "Why do I have to become a regular employee anyway? I took over my current position through proper procedures. That's what I'm saying. Act more like a wife. His argument made no sense. Just as everyone was starting to realize the conversation was going nowhere, my grandfather spoke up. If I left it to you, the company would be ruined in no time. What? My father exclaimed, his face turning red as he fell silent. Finally, the room quieted down, and my grandfather's calm voice filled the space. After all, you haven't forgotten that you're in this position because of the disrespect you showed to an important client, have you? This time, my father turned pale and stepped back. My grandfather began to slowly tell the story, as if speaking to my father. The company where my father works was originally supposed to be his as the president. But before the announcement of his appointment, he had an affair with the daughter of the president of the most important client. When the client's president found out, he stormed in. Because of that, the client threatened to stop all transactions, almost driving the company to bankruptcy. Hearing this, I felt embarrassed and pitiful for my father. But that was 10 years ago. It's past the statute of limitations, right? It's not for you to decide the statute of limitations. My mother interjected, cutting off his argument. My father glared at her in frustration. Then, clicking his tongue, he downed his drink in one gulp and left the room. Sorry for spoiling the celebration. No, it's my father who should be sorry. My grandfather shook his head and patted my head. Since my father had left, we restarted the celebration without him. I received an electronic dictionary from my grandparents, a book voucher from my mother, and the sneakers I wanted from Maria and Kent. I was in high spirits. When my mother and I got home, my father had already returned. Seeing the shopping bag I was holding, he clicked his tongue loudly. Lucky you, getting everything you want. It's a gift, it's only natural. Yeah, my bad. He apologized insincerely and went into his study. His attitude dampened my spirits, but the gifts still made me happy that night. Later, Maria and Kent invited me on a summer vacation trip. It seemed they were going abroad and thought it would be nice to take me along. My mother, having a business trip during that period, happily agreed to let me go. I thought my father would be displeased, but surprisingly, he was positive about it. Hey, that's great. Have a nice trip. I won't be here either, I've got a business trip. It turned out he had a business trip during the same period. I was braced for a snide remark or two, so this caught me off guard. Despite always complaining about work, my father was cheerfully preparing for his trip. It felt odd, but I was too excited about my trip to dwell on it. On the trip, I had a wonderful time with Maria and Kent. Beautiful scenery, delicious food. It was a luxurious vacation. Sally, is there anywhere you want to go? How about shopping together tomorrow, just the two of us? Really? I'd love to. But what about Kent? When I looked at Kent, he smiled and nodded. I was so happy I hugged Maria. Then Maria hugged me back. You're always such a sweetheart, no matter how old you get, Sally. I'm not a baby, I'm in middle school. Sorry, Maria said, still smiling. The next day, as planned, we went shopping. Kent had something he wanted to do and left the room earlier than us. Wow! This is amazing. This one's cute too. Maria and I were excitedly chatting and laughing in the store. Once our hands were full with shopping bags, we sat at a terrace to have some tea. While enjoying delicious cake, we were having a great time talking, but suddenly Maria fell silent and stared at one spot. What's wrong, Maria? Oh no! I followed her gaze and couldn't help but exclaim. There was my father with a young woman, both wearing frivolous aloha shirts, getting cozy with each other. That man. Wait, Maria. It's okay, all right? Maria looked like she was about to explode in anger, but I managed to calm her down. This wasn't the first time my father had an affair. It had been happening since I was little. At the worst times, he would even take me along to meet his mistresses. I loved my mother dearly, so of course, I was furious with him, and after that, he stopped taking me along. With such a history, my feelings towards my father's infidelity were just a resigned acceptance. We should tell Mom. For now, just ignore it, ignore it. Sally! Yes, you're right. Let's just take a picture and send it to her, Maria said, taking a photo to send to my mom. I was curious about how my mom would react, but I assumed it would end with her dropping the hammer on him, as usual. However, just before we were due to return home, I received a call from my grandmother with unbelievable news. Sally, calm down and listen. Your mother, she died in an accident. What? I was so shocked that I dropped the phone. Maria picked it up and, after hearing the same thing from my grandmother, broke down in tears. Kent took over the call, but both Maria and I could do nothing but cry. We returned home and went straight to the hospital where my mother was taken. The moment I saw her there, I burst into tears. Mom, Mom! This can't be! Maria collapsed in shock. Kent accompanied her to another room while I stayed and listened to my grandparents explain. My mom had jumped in to save a child who dashed into the street, becoming a human shield. She was hit by a car and severely injured on the asphalt, and by the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. The child only had minor injuries and was otherwise unharmed. I just stood there, numb, listening to the story. By the way, where's John? We can't get a hold of him. Hearing my grandparents, I mentioned that my father was abroad and also told them about the woman he was with. My grandfather was furious. Finally, we managed to contact my father 2 days after my mother's death, just as the funeral was about to start. Dying to save a kid, what a foolish thing to do. How can you say that? But that's the truth, right? My father said unapologetically, and everyone, including me, glared at him. Unperturbed by our stares, he casually took his seat as the chief mourner. You're not supposed to sit there. Huh? I'm the chief mourner, my grandfather said, and my father, looking displeased, moved from the chief mourner's seat to sit behind it. It was after the funeral. My father suddenly stood up, went to my mother's side, and, unbelievably, threw his wedding ring at her. What? What are you doing? Well, it's over between us now, right? No need to pretend anymore, he said and burst into loud laughter. Now I'm free. Then, pointing at me with a half-smile, he boldly declared, I don't need a child. At the funeral, everyone else looked at my father with disbelief, as if they couldn't believe what he just said. I'm getting remarried. This time to a younger and more beautiful woman. Right, Michelle? Oh, John, you always say the funniest things. My father called out to a woman named Michelle from the crowd of employees and embraced her. Michelle, looking pleased, clung to my father's arm. Do you even realize what's happening here? What? It's a day to celebrate. My old wife finally kicked the bucket. I glared at my father. Then, Maria gently hugged my shoulder. Sally will come with me. I won't pay child support. That's fine. Maria declared that firmly, holding me tight. From that day, I started living with my aunt and her husband. There was no contact from my father, but a month later, he suddenly called. Hey, help me out! Who is this? It's your dad! My only father is Kent, I said, then hung up and blocked his number. No matter how much he cried or pleaded, my father's hell had just begun. I'll make sure he regrets everything. After I blocked him, my father seemed to have called various relatives. But none of the relatives who knew about what happened at the funeral wanted anything to do with him. He was blocked by everyone he called, and finally, he showed up at my grandfather's company. I happened to be there delivering something I forgot, so I listened in disbelief to my father shouting outside the CEO's office. It was just a momentary lapse in judgment. So, you're the kind of man who, in a momentary lapse, throws a ring at your deceased wife. After my grandfather's words, there was a moment of silence behind the door. He was probably trying to think of an excuse. And just as I thought, he came up with one.
I was just confused. I didn't mean any harm. I was upset because I loved her.
I can't believe this. I couldn't help but express my disbelief at such a far-fetched explanation, and my father, with his sharp hearing, caught my voice.
Hey, Sally. Are you there? Tell your grandpa that I loved your mom.
Loved her? I was so angry I felt like I might faint. My grandfather patted my shoulder and nodded at me. I took a deep breath and then replied to my father.
Grandpa, everything he says is a lie. He never loved Mom or me. Are you kidding me? Come out here.
My father was yelling and banging on the door from the other side. But his actions couldn't stop me from speaking the truth.
He always cheated, making Mom sad, and he never said anything nice to me. He's not a father.
My words made my father even angrier. Finally, he kicked the door.
Who do you think raised you all these years? If you're going to talk like that, pay back all the education expenses right now.
At that moment, I realized all he cared about was money. Actually, my mom left a will. In it, she wrote that my father wouldn't get any inheritance as compensation for his infidelity.
You say pay back, but you never contributed to living expenses, did you? It's all written in the will. You shouldn't have meddled.
My father spat out those words resentfully. His selfishness gave me a headache. Then he said something even more unbelievable.
I'm not divorcing her. So, as the parent of a minor, I should manage her money, right?
Huh. I was completely astounded. It was my father who said he wanted a divorce, and the divorce papers had already been processed. In other words, their divorce was final.
What are you talking about? Shut up! Children should not interfere. I'll tell the office that the documents we submitted were a mistake.
He didn't realize that once documents are accepted by the office, they can't just be withdrawn unilaterally. Even as a middle schooler, I understood this. Why couldn't my father?
You're just a stranger now. The office won't accept such a one-sided request. No, we loved each other. I'm sure it'll be fine.
His overconfident words made both me and my grandfather look at each other and laugh. We could feel my father getting more irritated from behind the door.
What, you're making fun of me? Hey, don't you know? Mom wanted a divorce. What? She did?
My father's voice sounded utterly dumbfounded, like a bolt from the blue. I decided to give him an answer.
You know, we went on a trip overseas, to the same place as you, Dad. It was a coincidence. But when I told Mom, she said she wanted a divorce.
There was sudden silence on the other side of the door. Then I heard sniffling. It seemed my father truly believed Mom would never divorce him, and the shock made him break down in tears.
Why a divorce? She loved me, even forgave my infidelities. Why? Maybe she reached her limit of endurance?
My pinpoint words made him cry even more, audible even through the door. Yet, I couldn't feel any sympathy for him.
Anyway, it's time for you to leave. What? Wait. Hey, what are you doing? Let go of me.
It seemed like the security guards had arrived, and after a few moments of scuffle, the other side of the door quieted down. Grandpa and I sat down, taking a breath. What did my daughter see in that man?
I've been wondering the same.
We sighed and looked at each other, then started laughing. After a good laugh, Grandpa called the company lawyer and headed to the police station. Dad was issued a restraining order against us, complaining all the while, but he couldn't stand up to the police and eventually accepted it. Then, a few days of quiet returned. I missed Mom terribly, but having Maria around helped distract me a bit.
Sally, let's go shopping. Okay.
We had moved into Maria's house, so we went to a nearby department store to buy some essentials. From a distance, a disheveled man approached.
Eek! Dad?
I yelled out as he suddenly grabbed my arm. His hair was unkempt, and he was dressed in dirty clothes. It was my father. With bloodshot eyes, he begged.
Come on, $20,000, no, 2,000 will do. Give me some money. We're family, right?
I forcefully shook off his hand. He fell on his rear but quickly clung to my leg.
Let go of me. Give me the money. Give it to me.
My father, in his half-crazed state, lacked any of the cleanliness he had when we lived together. His shirt was filthy with mud stains, and he seemed like he hadn't bathed in days.
I haven't eaten in 2 days. I want to bathe and eat. Please.
No way.
Why don't you go to that woman?
As I dismissed him, my father, crying, responded.
Don't say that. She ran off with a younger guy when she found out I had no money. I've been kicked out of the house and have nowhere to go.
I almost blurted out serves you right, but managed to restrain myself. Beside me, Maria was shaking with anger.
How dare you say that? After you cheated with another woman and abandoned Sally. I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean any harm.
That makes it even worse. Maria's face was red with anger and tears. Holding her hand tightly, I spoke to my father.
I've been legally adopted. Maria is now officially my mom. So, we're strangers now. My father is Kent. Adopted?
My father was stunned, his eyes wide open. He had abandoned his middle school daughter. It should have been easy to predict. I despised my father for not understanding even such simple things.
If you're adopted, then the inheritance won't come to me.
Well, there was nothing for you in the first place. Be thankful you're not being charged alimony. I spoke plainly, and my father's face wrinkled in anger.
You. That's disrespectful to your father. I'm the reason you were born. You should be grateful and devoted to me.
Finally, my father's true colors showed as he yelled, causing a stir among the bystanders. I looked down on him with cold eyes. And I voiced my true feelings.
No money from me, all the cheating, and above all, making Mom sad. I called you Dad for Mom's sake, but I never thought of you as my father. Not then, not now.
I had never been so direct before, and my father looked up at me, dumbfounded.
Also, there's a restraining order against you. Please abide by it. Goodbye. Sally.
He reached out his hand, but I ignored him and entered the department store with Maria. My father was apprehended by security as he followed. Maria and I finally relaxed as we watched. The police took my father away, and he kept mentioning my name. Despite the restraining order, he still expected me to come for him. Maria was furious and arranged for a lawyer, while Kent discussed something with her. I asked about it, but they wouldn't tell me.
It's only natural as your parents, we're eager to handle it. You'll understand soon, don't worry, Kent reassured me.
A few days later, we went to my grandparents' house for a discussion, accompanied by Maria and Kent. Upon entering the living room, there were my father, looking completely worn out, and Michelle, who had been by his side during my mother's funeral. When they noticed me, both of them had frightened expressions and were trembling nervously.
Let's start the discussion,
my grandfather announced, and the atmosphere tensed up. The lawyer slowly read out the main purpose of today's meeting. Originally, as per my mother's will, there was no claim for alimony against my father, but also no inheritance for him. However, due to numerous nuisances, we decided to claim damages for the trouble caused, not just alimony for the affair. And for Michelle, who was the affair partner, we're going to claim alimony. That was what the lawyer read out. Both my father and Michelle turned pale upon hearing this.
Also, as an additional point, John and Michelle have been asked to resign from our company. Can't you reconsider?
Michelle pleaded, standing up in desperation. Grandfather's eyes were cold as he watched her. But she persisted.
Look, the alimony. I won't be able to pay it if I'm unemployed, right? That would be problematic, wouldn't it? So firing me isn't a wise decision.
Michelle spoke as if she had come up with a clever plan. However, grandfather's expression remained stern. Realizing this, Michelle started to stammer out excuses.
It was all John's idea. I couldn't refuse my boss's advances. It was against my will.
What? You're the one who came on to me. My father retorted as Michelle began to sob dramatically. Their shouting quickly filled the living room.
Silence!
Grandfather's stern voice brought their argument to a halt. The lawyer then spread out documents in front of them.
Here are the documents for the nuisance and alimony fees. Please read and sign. We can't pay this amount. That's not for you to decide.
After being curtly dismissed, Michelle reluctantly signed. Once she signed, she was escorted out of the room. However, my father kept his head down, refusing to sign. Maria's irritation was becoming apparent. Then Kent spoke up quietly.
Infidelity is the lowest, isn't it? What are you talking about all of a sudden? Betrayal, you know? Did you know it's a crime in some places abroad?
My father's face went pale upon hearing this. Kent continued, his expression impassive.
You promised at the wedding to support each other in sickness and health, right? Was breaking that vow and hurting your partner fun?
My father opened and closed his mouth but seemed unable to speak against Kent's intensity.
The woman you married was the sister of the woman I loved, the mother of my precious daughter, and my cherished childhood friend.
Well. Kent looked straight at my father with a smile and then slowly delivered his final words.
I will never forgive you.
Throughout, Kent didn't raise his voice but spoke gently, as if guiding my father. It seemed to affect my father more than any shouting would have. With a pale face, my father just stared at Kent, frozen. Kent gently put a pen in my father's hand.
You can sign now, right?
Yes, yes. My father seemed smaller than ever, even more so than when Mom was alive. After signing, my father left without looking at us, staggering out of the room. Later, I heard that he had taken out a loan to pay the nuisance fee. Kent is managing that money. It seems my father borrowed from a very dangerous place and soon disappeared without a trace. He might even be working on some fishing boat somewhere. As harsh as it may seem, I feel no sympathy for him. He brought it upon himself. In fact, I find myself hoping that the company he owes money to squeezes even more out of him. As for Michelle, after paying alimony for being involved with a married man and being forced to resign, her parents found out and she was sent back to the countryside. There, she was married off to a man 30 years her senior in the village and now leads a busy life with no rest, taking care of her mother-in-law and doing farm work. Apparently, that family had been looking for a young wife to take care of their elderly for some time. I heard that Michelle's parents harshly scolded her when she complained about wanting to escape. Maria and Kent, as my parents, shower me with love every day. They treat me like their real daughter, sometimes strictly scolding me. On the monthly anniversary of my mother's death, we visit her grave, eat her favorite foods, visit places she loved, and spend time remembering her. Watching the love between Maria and Kent makes me hope to have such a wonderful marriage when I grow up. My relationship with my grandparents is also great. Lately, they're considering building a vacation home for my overseas studies, which I'm desperately trying to dissuade them from. I do want to study abroad, but I'm just a first-year middle school student. Right now, I want to enjoy time with my friends in Japan, which I've told my grandparents. Though they are nearly 80, they're still very energetic, traveling often. Their wedding anniversary is approaching, so I'm trying to decide what to give them. Recently, a proposal I made in the student council was approved, so I've been busy every day. There are still many decisions to be made and problems to be solved. But it's a fulfilling job, and I enjoy discussing things at school the most. At home, I've recently become engrossed in reading English books. Maria gave me a book that my mother loved, and I'm slowly translating it with an electronic dictionary. It's not smooth sailing yet, but I find the translation work so enjoyable that I'm considering becoming a translator in the future. To achieve this, I've asked Maria to enroll me in a school where I can learn English conversation and comprehension. The separation from my mother is still very sad, and I often cry when I think of her, but I'm loved by many people and living in the present. Someday, when I go to heaven, I want to tell her all about it, which is why I've started keeping a diary. I plan to write about both successes and failures for my mother to hear about them. Maria and Kent have told me that it's okay not to forget my mother and not to force myself to call them mom and dad. But to me, they are like a second set of parents. So, for their upcoming anniversary, I've prepared a gift with a card that says, "Happy Anniversary, Mom and Dad." I'm excited, thinking they'll surely be happy. Every morning, the first thing I do is talk to my mother's photo. It's my daily routine. The sky outside is clear and blue. Maybe my mother is cheering me on. Thinking that makes me happy. My name is Nancy. I've been married for 7 years, but I've spent half of that time alone. The reason is that my husband Sam has been on a long-term business assignment. He's now in his 3rd year at this particular assignment. I feel it's about time he returned to the main office, but he mentioned that his period away might get extended. I work too, so I understand the need for his assignment. However, I do have some doubts about it. In the 1st year, he used to come home almost every month, but now he doesn't because the company won't cover his travel expenses. Even though he's allowed to cover expenses twice a year, he doesn't because he's too busy with work. When I offer to visit him, he says it would be inconvenient because he's so busy. It's strange, why would he refuse when his wife wants to visit? Then, one day, Sam suddenly came home.
It's a surprise! I wish you had told me you were coming.
I was overjoyed and jumped into his arms. But what he said next was shocking. "I'm sorry, my mistress is pregnant. I want a divorce."
What? I don't understand.
I want a divorce.
Why?
My mistress is pregnant.
Wait a minute, so you're admitting you cheated? And that's okay?
Yes, that's right. I felt dizzy hearing him calmly confirm it. My mind went blank, and it took me a while to grasp that I had been betrayed. I was so upset I couldn't even stand, and I just sat down right there. But Sam just looked down at me without offering a hand to help me up.
So, you're saying I've been betrayed by you?
I didn't mean for it to happen. He looked pained as he handed me a divorce paper, with his name already on it. Oh, he's serious. And in the consent section, there was the name of a woman I didn't recognize.
Who is this?
My mistress. A divorce with the mistress consenting? That's ridiculous. Can a divorce paper even be like this? All I can think of are the happy times I've had with Sam. Despite those moments, why did he turn to someone else?
Why?
I was lonely. I hated being away on assignment. I wish you could have come with me.
But we decided this together, didn't we?
Yes, we did. That's why it's all my fault.
That's not fair, saying it's all your fault and I'm sorry. You can't just settle everything like that.
No matter what you say, I am at fault. I'm sorry.
What was I to you then?
My wife.
Yes, your wife. What does that mean to you? What was I as your wife?
I'm sorry. His only reply was "I'm sorry," and I felt an urge to strike him. But hitting him wouldn't bring his feelings back. Instead, I'd just end up being labeled a hopeless woman in his eyes.
Didn't you enjoy being married to me?
It was fun, but I couldn't overcome the loneliness.
I was lonely too, but I never cheated.
I'm just weak. That's just cowardly. Planning to shoulder everything and act defiant? If you say that, I end up with nothing to say. So, I want a divorce.
How old is she?
34.
She's only a year younger than me.
I was lonely.
I've heard that already.
I'm sorry. It's my fault. He keeps repeating the same words. Why can't he say anything else? It's like there's nothing left inside him.
Is that why?
What do you mean?
So, you didn't come home because you wanted to spend time with her, even though you had travel expenses covered twice a year? Yeah, that's right.
And when I said I'd visit, you said you were busy because you wanted to be with her?
That's right. I wanted to cherish the time with her.
How can you say that so brazenly? What kind of person are you?
A dry laugh welled up in me. I'm sorry, I'm the one at fault. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I want you to understand. She needs me.
Is the time you spend with her more important than our first trip together, our first wedding anniversary, and all the time we spent together?
Yeah. Something inside me snapped. If only he had denied it. But with just one yeah, he negated everything.
So, she's that important to you because you were lonely?
Yeah. She filled the loneliness I felt.
Oh, that's great. Since I have a job, I couldn't fill your loneliness.
Yeah, exactly. You have your job, so I couldn't ask you to come with me. That's why it's my fault. I didn't make it clear, my bad.
I see. So, I want a divorce. Please.
Were you enduring that much loneliness?
Yeah.
So, you thought only you were suffering?
Huh? Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why your feelings shifted to another woman, right?
My emotions were swirling with anger. Despite feeling so sad and lonely, the other side of me emerged.
I do feel sorry, but I still want a divorce.
I looked up at my husband Sam directly and said, "Nope. I won't divorce you."
Why not? Just sign this, and you'll be free too?
Only you want to be free, right?
I'm fine as it is. You probably thought, given my personality, I'd understand if you said it's all your fault, and I'd agree divorce to make it easier for you, right? But unfortunately, this time it won't work that way. Why not? You're a kind woman, aren't you?
Yes, I have been super kind.
But I'm not always going to be, especially not this time.
Absolutely no divorce.
Why not?
An affair will end eventually. I won't throw away 7 years just for that.
I know you love me. But I don't feel the same way.
Do I really love him? Is that why I don't want a divorce? I don't think that's it. I was free when he wasn't around. Even when he was on assignment, I never felt lonely. Life with our young child was fulfilling.
She's pregnant with your child?
Seems so.
But I have a child here too.
Who's more important to you?
Her, of course.
Huh?
The child here is a girl. But over there, a boy is being born. A boy can take care of me in my old age.
Children are not tools to be used for your care.
I know, but that's idealistic. No matter what, we all age. A daughter won't be of use.
What is he saying? You took me away from my parents too.
That's why. That's why a daughter won't do it.
Seriously?
I always thought I didn't need a daughter. They just cost money. That's why I need a son. She's carrying the son I want.
You're the worst.
Yeah, I am. That's why let's get a divorce. I have to take responsibility as a man.
Responsibility. What about your responsibility to me?
You can live on your own.
What's that supposed to mean?
She can't live by herself.
I pushed the divorce papers back at him with a smile.
Are you really not going to divorce?
Yeah, divorce isn't something you just decide on the spot. I can't just say, okay, let's divorce upon hearing about an affair. Plus, there's a child, right? You're thinking too simply.
I'm serious.
Yeah. I don't know how seriously you thought about this, but I'm not getting a divorce.
I see, got it. I'll contact you again after a while. Think about it.
After saying this, my husband Sam left the divorce papers and walked out of the house. Left alone, I stared intently at the papers.
What a joke. As if I'm going to let it end with just I'm at fault. I'll make him realize.
The next day, I went straight to a private investigator and asked them to look into Sam's mistress. I thought it was crucial to know your enemy if you want to teach them a lesson.
The investigation was completed in about 2 weeks. Smirking at the results, I sent Sam a message. Hey, how's it going? How are things with your secret wife?
Stop talking weird.
Oh right, she's your open wife, isn't she?
What do you want to say?
I was just wondering if the child in her belly is really yours.
What? Of course, it's my child. Are you making up silly fantasies because you're jealous?
I hope it's just my imagination. Is your girlfriend really faithful to only you?
Of course. You think she's seeing other men?
Bingo.
No way.
Confident in his response, I sent him a photo. This is your mistress, right?
Did you investigate?
Of course, I wanted to know the face of the person who's agreeing to the divorce. It's not surprising.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to divorce you and marry her officially.
She seems nice. I was surprised when I looked into her.
Right. I knew you'd say that.
Yes, a real catch. Quite the social climber.
What do you mean?
I sent him a second photo. It showed the mistress exiting a motel with a man who wasn't Sam.
What's this?
Surprised? That man isn't you.
Can you believe such a photo?
Oh, how about this one? The third photo was with another man. Also leaving a motel, closely snuggling up. She's amazing. She's been dating about 3 other men. She's in and out of motels daily, even with 2 or 3 men in a day. She should just make a career out of it. She's quite resilient.
No, it's a lie, a fake. She wouldn't do this.
Hard to believe, isn't it? I felt the same when I heard about your affair.
We're different.
Strange boast. By the way, I heard your company doesn't tolerate infidelity.
That's right. But if we're divorced, it's not infidelity.
We're not divorced yet.
Infidelity can lead to dismissal. You're not thinking of doing something silly, are you?
Silly? I wouldn't think of such a thing.
If you don't divorce me, and you expose my affair, it'll hurt you too.
Of course, I know. As long as we're married, I wouldn't do such a thing.
Right, you're a smart woman. You wouldn't do something foolish.
Yes, I am. But it depends on you.
Huh?
Really your child?
What? Annoying. Of course, it's my child.
Did you know DNA tests can be done during pregnancy?
Where's the need for that?
Even after seeing those photos, you're sure it's your child?
Of course. Photos can be faked. I trust her.
Okay. You might want to check, but if you're sure, fine. After ending the chat, I was amazed he still insisted it was his child. I decided then to make him truly face the consequences. A few days later, Sam called in a panic.
Hey! I've been fired from my job.
Oh, why?
They found out about my affair.
Really? How come?
Don't tell me, you.
What?
You didn't snitch on the company, did you?
Why would I do that? What's in it for me?
But if it wasn't for that...
Sam's fears were correct. After all, I was the one who reported him. If I'm going to drag him through hell, it has to be thorough. So, I took his job away from him. Look, don't you think it's obvious? A married man living with another woman. Plus, the company was even paying for homecoming travel expenses. Anyone would think it's infidelity. Maybe they questioned your ethics?
Is that what this is about?
You thought you wouldn't get caught?
I thought I was managing it well.
Silly. Bad deeds always get exposed.
What am I supposed to do now? With a child on the way and everything.
Tough, isn't it? You think the child is yours, right?
Of course, it's my child. How many times do you need me to say it?
Then you just have to do your best, right? Of course, you still need to provide living expenses for me too. We're not divorced yet.
You have a job.
That's a different matter. Since we're not divorced, it's important. I had to say it twice.
What am I supposed to do?
I don't know.
But if it's really that hard, I guess I could give you a gift. A gift? Yeah. A gift that'll make you cry with joy. What is it? I'll divorce you. What? Really? Then I don't have to send you living expenses, right? Right, you won't need to pay living expenses. But I'll take a fair amount of child support. Yeah, I guess that can't be helped. And I'm keeping the house. So, even if you come back, you won't have a place to live. That's fine. I don't plan to come back anyway. She's from here, so we'll probably live here from now on. Great, that works for me. I'll send you the bill for child support, and make sure you pay it. All right, I got it. Once you pay, I'll file the divorce papers. All right. But I'm surprised you decided this. You really were the woman I loved. Sam was thrilled. Later, when I sent the bill for child support, Sam borrowed from consumer loan companies to pay it. Hey, Nancy! That was a bit steep. But I paid for it. It's only fair. You did that much. But you only paid the partial amount, right? Of course, I paid it all. I said I wanted the child support in one lump sum. What? That's impossible. Why? You said you'd pay. If you don't, I won't divorce you. Would you rather pay $2,000 every month forever? Okay. I'll do it if you divorce me. Then, please do. So, Sam borrowed from several loan companies to pay me. Of course, he kept it a secret from her. Now, the divorce is finalized. And, exulting in the prospect of marrying her, my ex-husband Sam was overjoyed. And, as a final revenge, I mailed Sam the documents and photos from the private investigator. Hey, what's this? Hello, Sam. How's life post-divorce? What's this about? What do you mean? You sent me documents from the private investigator. Oh, the stuff I had researched. I thought I'd send it to you since I don't need it anymore. This says she's in debt for $200,000. Yeah, she's quite the debtor. And she has 3 kids? Yes, 3 girls. It's going to be lively. Though, apparently, she doesn't know who the father of any of them is. I don't need daughters. That's too bad. They're the children of the woman you love. So, is this true? She's currently being taken care of by her mom, but she'll take all of them once we're married? Seems like it. She's their mother, after all. I've already registered for marriage. Congratulations. Happy wedding. That's just perfect. It's not perfect. Why not? I didn't know she had such a debt. I'm already in debt for $264,000 for your child support, and now I have to deal with her debt and 3 kids. You're going to be a father of 4. No time for affairs now. I can't handle 4 kids with all this debt. What should I do? Debt goes away if you steadily pay it off. Might take decades. As for the kids, they're your beloved's children. You have to accept them. If I knew it would be this hard, I wouldn't have gotten married. I should have stayed married to you and continued our affair. I couldn't believe he could say such a thing so casually. This man is truly despicable. To think he could say he should have continued an affair while married. Oh, by the way, her mother is sick, right? What? With what? Seems like it's quite serious. She's been looking after the kids, after all. That must have been tough. She's been working hard for her grandkids, so you better take good care of her. She seems to be short on money too. What? No way. It's all in the report. Ugh, yeah, it's true. Does this mean I'll eventually have to take care of her too? Looks like it. Oh boy, what a handful. Better have a good talk. How can I bring that up now? We just got married, this will totally ruin our newlywed bliss. Right. And you're unemployed now. Damn it. Sam, now jobless, tried to find work but could only get part-time gigs. The place he moved to was quite rural. Not many job opportunities for a 40-year-old like him.
Still, wanting to enjoy his newlywed life, he kept all these issues under wraps until, what is this? He exploded upon seeing his newborn child.
Hey! Why are you yelling? This is a hospital.
You!
This child clearly isn't mine. It's just different genes. You've been calling yourself this child's dad all this time. That's good enough. Different genes mean it's another man's child. Don't fuss about it. It's just that one of the guys I played with happened to be black.
Played with?
You mean you were seeing a black guy while with me?
Yes, just like you were doing. You were seeing me while having a wife.
I was?
Of course. Just like you, I can't be blamed.
But a black guy?
Can't help it. I was seeing 5 guys. No way to know which one it would be.
That's... What kind of woman are you?
What kind? I just love my freedom.
Freedom? You call this freedom?
It's no big deal. I didn't expect you to make such a fuss over something so small.
Small, you say?
That's when Sam let it all out.
Is it true you're in debt for $200,000?
Yes, it is.
What's all that money for?
Not all men are rich. Plus, I wanted to look good when going out.
So, it's all just to show off?
Yes, obviously. You approached me seeing how I look. Who would be interested in a poorly dressed woman?
Ugh.
Realizing she was right, Sam was at a loss for words. Then, he brought up the children, and just then, her mother arrived with the kids.
Maria, congratulations on the birth.
Oh, Mom.
Sam, congratulations. Since we're officially married and you've had the baby, I thought I'd bring these kids back. I've been feeling worse lately, and might have to be hospitalized soon. That bad?
Yes.
But I don't have much money. So, Sam, I'm counting on you. Counting on me for what?
I'll take care of the kids, and in return, you'll have to take care of my mother. I thought her old age was far off, but she's frail. We might need to gather money for surgery.
No way! How can I handle all these kids and your mother too?
She's my mom, you have to take care of her. I won't forgive you if you neglect her.
This is crazy! It's like a scam! $200,000 in debt and 3 secret children? And now a black baby? What kind of woman are you? And a frail mother-in-law too?
I think it was then. At the perfect moment, I messaged her. Nice to meet you. I'm Sam's ex-wife, Nancy. Just to let you know, your husband has a debt of $264,000. He's been fired and is working part-time now. Tough life, right? Bye. What's this?
Huh? Who's it from?
Your ex-wife. Hey, what's this $264,000 debt?
You called me a scammer, what's this about? You have more debt than me, and I didn't even know?
Sam got yelled at by her, but he yelled back, turning the hospital room into a battlefield. As for me, I sent the message and looked at the photo in front of me. It was a photo of her leaving a hotel with a black man. I kept this one to myself, not sending it to Sam. Why? Because I wanted him to see the child with his own eyes. After that, Sam's debt, including his current wife's share, ballooned to $464,000. Weighed down by the debt, Sam seemed to be in deep despair. Working as a couple might have been a solution, but it wasn't that simple. They had a total of 4 young children. Maria, the wife, apparently couldn't afford to play around anymore and was looking after the children as a mother should. So, even when Sam asked her to work, she would only say, "How can I work when the kids are this young?" Don't you think it's pitiful for the kids? I won't work until they grow up. Maria seemed to be quite a strong woman. Moreover, they had to live with her frail mother, further straining their finances. Yet, even from her mother, they couldn't get living expenses, let alone food money. Desperate, Sam contacted me with a feeble voice, begging for help. Of course, I just laughed it off as a joke, but the reality was that they were crammed into a tiny apartment, a family of 7. Sam, harried by his wife to work, juggled multiple part-time jobs and could hardly get any sleep at home, almost like he was back on a business trip. He would contact me occasionally, worn out, repeating how much he hated it. As for me, I had grown accustomed to life without a husband and didn't have a single problem. The large sum of money I received ensured my peace of mind. Now, it's just my child and me, spending our days in tranquility. My name is Sarah Johnson. I'm turning 40 this year. I married a man who had a son from a previous marriage. The stepson is now 19 years old. I've been living with him for about 5 years now, but he just doesn't warm up to me. A year ago, my husband and I were involved in an accident while we were out, and my husband passed away. I was left with after effects from the accident, and now I live my life in a wheelchair. As I was getting used to life in a wheelchair, my stepson, Kenny, decided to go on a long trip with his friends. Just before he left, he suddenly threw me in my wheelchair onto the 30th floor balcony. He said, "Stepmother, freeze to death and go to the other world," closed the window, and left for his trip. I couldn't understand what had happened at first. Just a few minutes before, I was relaxing and watching TV in the living room, and suddenly I was pushed onto the balcony in my wheelchair, unable to resist. I kept asking Kenny, "What are you doing? Where are you taking me?" But he ignored me and threw me onto the balcony. It was early December, and it was very cold outside. Moreover, I was only in my house clothes, so it felt even colder. Once thrown onto the balcony, I couldn't stand up on my own. I shouted, "Help! Help!" several times, but Kenny ignored me and left for his trip. Living on the 30th floor of a high-rise, my cries for help couldn't reach anyone outside. Besides, it being December, there were hardly any people out on their balconies. All I could do was hope that miraculously someone from a neighboring apartment or from a floor above or below would come out onto their balcony. However, the apartments are spaced well apart, so even if someone were on their balcony, they might not hear me. Lying there in my wheelchair, unable to raise my voice much, I thought this might be the end for me and wondered how things had come to this. I thought about my life and how it wasn't supposed to be like this, and tears naturally started to flow. Before meeting my husband, I was enjoying my single life. Living alone, I was good at household chores and cooking, but I didn't have much desire to marry until I was past 30. I had more fun hanging out with friends and enjoyed my job, so I wasn't that interested in romance or marriage. However, as my friends started getting married and having children, I found myself growing apart from them. Even though I didn't have a strong desire to marry, I started feeling lonely and began to want a partner. That's when I met my husband. I met him while having a drink alone at a bar. He happened to sit next to me, and we hit it off. He was divorced and had been raising Kenny on his own as a single father. I admired how he had already experienced marriage and was raising a child by himself at our age. While running his own business, he managed to balance work and parenting. He would humbly say it wasn't a big deal because he had the help of his parents at his in-laws' house. I loved that modest side of him. He told me he got divorced just before Kenny started elementary school. I didn't ask for details, but apparently, his ex-wife left almost like eloping, and he ended up raising Kenny without any custody battle. Kenny had often expressed a desire to see his mother, but he never got the chance. His father always said that his ex-wife was unfit to be a mother and didn't want Kenny to see her. Maybe he didn't want Kenny to go to her if he asked, probably because it would make him feel lonely. I thought that was the real reason he was so adamant about not letting Kenny see his ex-wife. When I remarried my husband, Kenny was right in the midst of his adolescence. Despite his constant wishes to see his mom, he was introduced to a new mother, me, and he was very cold and didn't accept me. I didn't expect to be accepted right away, and at first, I didn't mind and focused on housework and cooking. I quit my job to be a full-time homemaker, supporting my husband and raising Kenny. That was my job, and I worked hard at it. I asked my husband about Kenny's favorites and tried to make things he liked, hoping to get accepted by him sooner, but he didn't warm up to me, and it was disheartening. Even after years, he never warmed up to me, and my heart broke many times.
You went into my room without permission. Don't ever come in again. Make sure to iron my uniform shirt properly. Don't talk to me so familiarly. Fake mom. These harsh words had become a part of my daily life.
I tried to convince myself it was just his rebellious phase, but there were days when I ended up crying alone. My husband would always scold Kenny firmly for such behavior and comforted me each time I was mistreated. He was a kind and appreciative husband, thanking me every day for marrying him and taking on the role of a full-time homemaker, especially since we had a child. But then my husband died in an accident, leaving just Kenny and me behind. Kenny couldn't forgive that I was the only one who survived the accident. At the funeral, he caused a scene, yelling, "It's her fault Dad died." From there, his disdain for me became even more apparent. Before, despite his rebelliousness and harsh words, we still had conversations, occasionally ate together, and even went out as a family, albeit rarely. But after the accident, he mostly ignored me at home. He didn't want to eat with me, so I would prepare meals and take them to his room. After graduating high school, he became a part-timer. He doesn't contribute financially to the household, and sometimes he would ask for money for his leisure. Which was the only time we talked. A normal parent might say things like, "I can't give you so much money," or "You should contribute some of your earnings to the household," but I couldn't say those things for fear of being disliked even more. For a while after the accident, my in-laws and my parents took turns coming over to help take care of me. Thanks to the high-rise condo and inheritance my husband left behind, I could live without working, and I even had enough to remodel the apartment for my wheelchair. I got used to the wheelchair and managing most things on my own, which meant less frequent visits from my parents and in-laws. And then, just when things seemed to be getting on track, Kenny threw me onto the balcony. I had no visitors scheduled for the next few days, and my phone was inside the house, so I had almost given up hope of being rescued when suddenly the balcony door opened and I heard my mother's voice. "Are you okay? What happened?" I was so relieved that I burst into tears. She had come because she thought it was strange that I wasn't answering her calls. I explained to her that Kenny had thrown me out onto the balcony. Maybe he thought he'd get the inheritance if I was gone, or maybe he just wanted to live with his real mother, or perhaps he just found me annoying, I don't know, but my son nearly killed me. My mother was shocked when she heard this, but she seemed to have an idea and made a suggestion. When Kenny returned from his trip 9 days later, he noticed how unusually clean the house was. He felt something was off and went to check the balcony, but I wasn't there. Kenny probably thought I had died. He was stunned for a while, realizing that all my belongings were gone from the house. I decided to move to my childhood home, following my mother's suggestion. "You can't live here anymore, we don't know what might happen next. Just come to our house. You've been living in this high-rise, struggling with your wheelchair life just to be with Kenny, right? But if Kenny says he doesn't need you, then you don't have to hesitate to come back to us. We are here for you," my mother said, and I cried again, feeling relieved. Kenny had always talked about wanting to live with his real mother, and my husband was worried about it. He had even said, "If something happens to me, it's okay to leave Kenny with his real mother." By that time, Kenny was already over 18, so even if his real mother had neglected him, he would survive, and my husband wanted me to prioritize Kenny's wishes to meet his mother. I had talked about this with my mother before, so she suggested that we let his real mother take care of him. "Why don't you fulfill Kenny's wish to see his real mom? Your husband was adamant about not letting him meet her, and maybe you're carrying too much burden by yourself, thinking you have to do the same and keep living with Kenny." I was surprised at how accurately she hit the mark. "How did you know what I was feeling?" "Well, I'm your mother. I had always thought you were reluctant to contact his real mother. Your husband had already said it was okay to let him meet her, but for some reason you continued living with Kenny, so I thought maybe you were being stubborn. But what Kenny did this time is beyond a rebellious phase, it's inexcusable. I can't stay silent after he put my precious daughter through such an ordeal. I think it's time to grant Kenny's wish and let you live your life happily. Even if his real mother was the worst, if Kenny happily goes to her, I'm okay with that. Encouraged by my mother, I made up my mind and contacted Kenny's real mother to take care of him. His real mother seemed very happy to have Kenny come home. I conveyed this to Kenny over the phone, and he seemed pleased. I gave him his real mother's new name, address, and phone number. I'm glad you get to go to your real mom's. I'm going to sell the high-rise, okay? I said. I don't have to live with the fake mom anymore, do whatever you want. By the way, you're still alive? I don't think we'll ever meet again, but take care. Kenny said before hanging up. There was no apology in the end, but I felt so relieved knowing I wouldn't have to meet Kenny again. I think I got used to the sarcasm and harsh treatment, being treated almost like a servant for about 5 years living with Kenny. So, it didn't hurt anymore, but now that I don't have to see him again, it's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. My body and mind feel lighter. It's been years since I've felt this exhilarated. I'm glad I contacted his real mom. Thank you so much, Mom. Sarah, you've been so down. I was really worried and wanted you to come back home, but you were trying so hard for Kenny, I couldn't bring it up. Let's live happily together from now on. I was excited at the thought of being able to do what I love and live my life. Marrying my husband wasn't a mistake, but I think experiencing marriage once is enough for me. I decided to enjoy my single life again and lifted my ban on alcohol. When Kenny was here, I thought I might need to take him to the hospital if he suddenly got sick, so I didn't drink. This is the best drink I've had in a long time. You really did a great job as a mother for Kenny. I'm proud of you. I was embarrassed but happy to be praised by my mother. I realized that Kenny had been the center of my life without me noticing. I never got called mom, but I might have given him more love than a real son. Thinking back on being thrown onto the balcony, it was indeed tough, but now I enjoyed my first drink in a long time. About a month into my life at my parents' house, I received a call from Kenny. Hey, I want to come back. What happened? You finally got to meet the mother you've always wanted to see. Kenny called to say he wanted to come back, even though not much time had passed. When I asked about the situation, it turned out his biological mother was worse than he had imagined. I was relieved after talking to her on the phone. She seemed like a bright and kind person. But she had a reason for welcoming Kenny so warmly. She knew from our phone conversation that my husband had passed away, so she assumed Kenny might have inherited something. That's why she welcomed him, eyeing the inheritance. Unaware of this, Kenny was initially happy to reunite with his mother, but he soon realized she was only interested in money. She talked about nothing but money, showing no joy in their reunion. After living there for a few days, he understood that she had welcomed him just for his inheritance. Her husband didn't hold a job for long, and their savings were almost gone. They already had 3 kids, and their household was struggling financially. Now with Kenny, there were 6 of them. You're staying here, so you should give us the inheritance you got, his mother and her husband told him, and within a few days, they took almost all of his inheritance. Kenny initially thought it was fair to give them the inheritance since he was staying with them. However, he was completely out of his element living there and found it hard to adjust. When Kenny lived with me, I always made sure to prepare his favorite dishes and balanced meals. But at his mother's, they mostly ate ramen noodles. The kids were used to it and happily ate them, but for Kenny, who was used to a well-rounded meal, this was a shock. Their idea of eating out was mostly junk food, not restaurants. The nutrition was highly unbalanced, and he started feeling unwell after just a few days. I realized that you were always careful about nutritional balance. I used to just eat whatever I wanted with my friends, not thinking about vegetables or anything. But now, living like this, I understand how lucky I was to have someone care about my diet. The kids who are used to this lifestyle seem fine, but it's definitely not good for their health, and I think it'll catch up with them eventually. I had never been to a supermarket before, but feeling a crisis for my health, I went to buy vegetables for the first time. I even tried cooking. I did it secretly because if my mom saw me, she'd probably expect me to cook from now on. But I couldn't make anything nearly as delicious as your cooking. I tried to feed it to the kids, but they're not used to eating vegetables and refused to eat it at all. Being rejected even before they tried my cooking was really tough. Kenny shared. When we were living together, it was common for Kenny to eat out without telling me and then say he didn't need dinner. I would just have his portion for my lunch the next day. But it seems like he's finally realized how hard that was for me, and I'm glad to see he's grown a bit. I finally understood how hard it is to plan meals and go grocery shopping. It's tough to make even one dish, let alone several, and I appreciated how amazing it was that I did that for me, someone who's not even your biological son. How could you do all that? Now I realize how incredible what you did was.
Why did I do it? Well, even though you always called me a fake mom, to me, you were my real son. It's natural for a mother to care about her son's health and make him proper meals.
I spoke my mind. Kenny seemed very emotional and started crying over the phone. After a while, he continued talking. I had thought our relationship was over, but I couldn't help listening to him, especially since he sounded so distressed. Now, they're even asking for my part-time earnings. I work 5 days a week, but my wage isn't high, and after taxes, there's not much left. I told them that, but they said, we're a family, we should help each other out during tough times, and now most of my earnings go to them. I hardly have any money left, and I can't hang out with my friends like before.
But you gave them all your inheritance, right? That was a significant amount. They shouldn't need any more money from you.
I think they're saving it somewhere, but they keep saying they have no money. Both of them work, so they can't be that broke.
If they're just eating ramen noodles, they shouldn't be spending that much, right? Why are they taking so much money from you?
I don't know. But those two drink a lot. They feed the kids ramen noodles, but buy lots of snacks for themselves to drink every night. They seem to be having a great time. When they both have a day off, they leave the kids with me and go to the casino all day. They say they mostly win, so they're not losing money, but I think they're actually spending a lot there. I once said they could save money if they stopped gambling and drinking. They got really angry and hit me. They were drunk and didn't hold back, it hurt a lot. I had never been hit by anyone before, so it was tough. Kenny had been abused by his mother and her husband. But what you said wasn't wrong, right? Why should you be hit for that? They say they need gambling and drinking to deal with the stress of daily work. Even if they stop those, living costs money, so they say I should contribute my earnings. They tell me I don't understand because I'm just a kid and that I should earn money and contribute to the family. Listening to Kenny's story was disheartening. It's sad to see a child having to sacrifice so much. The problems didn't stop there. Since Kenny arrived, his mother and her husband started going to the casino more often, leaving him to take care of the 3 younger kids. He struggled with the kids jumping on him, doodling on his belongings, and having to break up their fights. Kenny, who had been spoiled as an only child, was experiencing not getting his way for the first time. Among the 3 children at his biological mother's home, one of them didn't warm up to Kenny at all. They ignored him when he talked and would snap at him, saying things like, "Get out of here, you make it too crowded." Kenny realized just how hurtful such behavior could be, as he had treated me the same way before. Every time I see that kid who won't warm up to me, I feel like I'm looking at myself. Being ignored hurts more than I expected. Dad and you never ignored me, no matter how rebellious I was. You always faced me and prioritized my feelings. I've only now come to appreciate that, Kenny said, sounding completely changed and remorseful. It's only been about a month, right? I went through 5 years of you not warming up to me, and it was extremely hard.
Toward the end, we hardly even talked. Living with someone like that was really tough. Not to mention, I was struggling physically with my paralysis and mentally with the loss of your father. Being constantly told to bring Dad back was almost too much for me.
I shared these thoughts with Kenny, remembering the past.
I'm really sorry. I finally understand how awful I was. Please let me have another chance.
But I simply asked, is that all the complaints about your current home? I was already fed up with hearing about his troubles at his biological mother's house, but Kenny insisted he had more to share.
It's not just that. My mom never cleans the house, so it's always dusty and suffocating. I never did any cleaning when I lived with you, but now I've developed a rash-like allergy from the dust and house mites. So, I started doing all the house cleaning. I wish my mom would do it, but she says it's only my problem since I'm the one with the rash. And I'm sleeping in the same room with the 3 kids. They snore and move a lot, so I haven't been sleeping well. I'm used to a quiet, private space, and it's been really tough every day. I just want to escape this life.
Kenny sounded extremely distressed by his current living situation. My late husband knew his ex-wife was like this and didn't want Kenny to meet her. I always thought he didn't want Kenny to be taken away and accused him of that once. But then he told me how terrible she was. They had a shotgun wedding and never lived together before marriage. After getting married and having Kenny, my husband realized she never did any housework. My husband's business was starting to take off, and he was extremely busy with work. Despite this, when he came home, he took care of all the household chores and looked after Kenny, which meant he hardly got any sleep. During the day, my in-laws, concerned about Kenny, would come to check on him. Despite being a full-time housewife, his ex-wife hardly took care of him and was reckless with money. Stressed about not being able to go to the casino after the birth of their child, she went on a shopping spree with my husband's money. I had heard all this from my husband, so after he passed away, I tried my best to raise Kenny on my own. But I found out that Kenny had come to resent me to the extent of trying to kill me. My mother suggested, since it was Kenny's wish, that I should let him go. So, I decided to distance myself from Kenny.
I never knew my real mother was such a terrible person. I want to escape this life and come back home.
Kenny seemed to think it was natural for me to welcome him back. Where will you go back to? I told you to do whatever you want, so our house is no longer available. What?
You said to do whatever I want, right? And after being thrown off the balcony and left there, I can't live with you anymore.
I'm really sorry about that time. Kenny had been angry at me all this time for supposedly ruining the chance for his father and ex-wife to reconcile.
I was so wrong. I realize now how much I took things for granted. I'm truly sorry. Please forgive me.
I forgive you. I understand you've reflected. But there's no home for us to live together anymore, and you're 19 and an adult now, so please feel free to live your life. I said that and hung up the phone. Kenny decided to live on his own, escaping from his mother's home. His mother and her husband, realizing they would be in trouble without Kenny helping with the house and contributing money, tried hard to stop him from leaving. You should only have one home, right here. Let's live together, they sweet-talked him, but Kenny, feeling he would go insane if he continued living there, firmly left. However, with my husband's inheritance gone, he couldn't afford a luxurious lifestyle anymore. He had to transition from a wealthy life in a high-rise to a life of poverty. Realizing how privileged his previous life had been, the mother he had longed to meet turned out to be toxic, and Kenny was shocked by this revelation. Even after leaving her home, she frequently called him asking for money. I explained everything to my in-laws, including being thrown off the balcony and letting Kenny meet his biological mother. They reflected on having spoiled their grandson too much and apologized to me. Deciding that Kenny needed to learn the hardships of life, they chose to quietly watch over him without intervening. As for me, I'm living a happy life at my parents' house, relieved from the responsibilities of parenting. Well, I guess marrying that old hag was impossible. I'm looking for a younger bride, so I canceled the engagement. My fiancé, who is just 1 year younger, called me an old hag. That alone was shocking, but to cancel the engagement too. My fiancé, Bob, had a captivating charm. Always surrounded by people, Bob carried himself with confidence. He cheated on me more than once, not just once or twice. Each time, I forgave him. I clenched my fist and welcomed Bob with a welcome home, and at night, I quietly shed tears of frustration alone. I couldn't take it anymore. I can't forgive Bob. No, maybe I've never truly forgiven him even once. I've just pretended and covered it up to be with him because I want to. Now, the backlash is hitting me all at once. I looked at Bob. Bob. I won't let your whims and selfishness control me anymore. From now on, I'll live by my own will. As the first step, let's give Bob a punishment. Now, are you prepared? My name is Catherine O'Connor. Just the other day, I celebrated my 32nd birthday with my ex-fiancé Bob. I've been in a relationship with Bob for 18 years. When we met, we were still in junior high school. Since then, it feels like I've been living according to Bob's whims. Nodding to Bob's selfishness, accepting Bob's requests. As we did that, both Bob and I crossed the age of 30. I began to think about marrying Bob, and I thought Bob would too. So he gave me an engagement ring. I thought that's why he gave it to me. I wonder how much more I can endure. The days of betrayal from Bob. I met Bob when I was a second-year junior high school student. Bob Reynolds, a first-year student who had just enrolled, confessed to me.
Please go out with me. Huh, really?
I was taken aback. Being confessed to by someone I had just met was quite unexpected. But I also felt happy. Bob was already tall and handsome, and above all, I felt proud to be the one confessed to. I had a sense of superiority and excitement that I might date a boy before anyone else. So I nodded. Sure, I'm Bob Reynolds.
Nice to meet you.
He called me that once, and then Bob blushed and looked at me. He hesitated and said something like this.
Is it okay if we hold hands?
Huh, Bob?
Sure, right, Catherine?
Mischievous voice and expression. That's when I completely fell for Bob. But the elation didn't last long. Catherine, you're dating Bob, right? Oh, yeah. I wondered why my classmates knew about it. Perhaps my confusion showed, as another classmate chimed in. Bob has been spreading the word. If you're a student at this school, everyone probably knows.
What, Bob?
I couldn't believe it.
Why would you do something like that?
After school, I asked Bob that question.
If it gets to the teacher, it'll be a big problem.
I'm sorry. But I was so happy. I wanted everyone to know that Catherine is my girlfriend. Bob answered, his head down. Be more careful next time. Yeah, I'd be happy if you could. At this point, I forgave Bob. In fact, I found Bob cute beyond words. If I had a little brother, would I feel this way? No. Back then, I recognized that he was a much more annoying yet sweet presence than a little brother. That's why Bob's initial betrayal hurt so much. A mocking voice saying, "She's the school's top beauty, huh?" It was so different from what was directed at me that I didn't immediately realize it was Bob's voice. However, once I did, there was no mistaking it was him. During school break time, I was about to visit Bob's class when I overheard that exchange in the hallway. This school isn't low level, is it? She's below average there. But her figure is good, isn't it? Oh yeah, her chest? Her boobs are definitely big. I'm looking forward to that. Well, that's a relief. Bob is a man after all. Oh, yeah. Sleazy laughter erupted. A group of boys, with Bob at the center, had gathered. They seemed to be excited about my appearance. I leaned against the wall, unable to move from the spot. My legs were trembling.
Catherine, are you okay?
Oh, yeah. My classmates came over, suspicious of my behavior. Unaware, Bob continued to frolic with the other boys.
What's with that?
So low.
It's important to go along with the conversation.
I answered, my voice choked with tears.
Catherine.
I guess he's embarrassed by the teasing from others. That's why he said such things. My words stopped there. Tears started to overflow. Accompanied by my classmates, I cried as I went back to my classroom. From then on, Bob often darkened my heart. If there was a girl at another school who was popular, he would immediately go after her. It seems that some of them actually tried to get serious with Bob.
Catherine, you have to go.
Spurred on by my classmates, I headed to the scene of Bob's date with his affair. When he saw me, Bob's face turned pale.
Catherine.
Who's this? The girl he was cheating with was prettier than many others. If I had left things as they were, maybe Bob would have moved on to her. Suppressing my desire to run away, I answered. I'm Bob's girlfriend.
Catherine.
Bob called my name almost like a scream. The other girl gave Bob a stern look.
Oh. Wait. You've been lying.
That's the worst.
No, it's not like that.
Bob watched her leave with a pained voice and expression. Left behind, Bob turned to me, looking completely frightened.
Catherine, I need to tell you something.
What do you mean? My voice was cold. In response, Bob floundered like a fish out of water, opening and closing his mouth. But eventually, he seemed to find an excuse.
She was so persistent.
Whenever I confronted him, Bob would always say this.
It was just one date. You're my main girl, Catherine.
Yeah. I nodded. Not because I was convinced, but because I knew arguing further wouldn't make Bob apologize. And more than anything, I didn't want to be disliked by Bob for nagging about his affairs. What started as a relationship of superiority had become dominated by Bob. Even about my future, Bob insisted I choose a high school that suited his academic level and convenience.
We should go to the same high school, right? Yeah, but my teacher said I could go to a better one. Are you going to abandon me?
Bob looked at me with tearful eyes. At this point, I could see through his fake tears. Still, I couldn't stand up to him.
Okay, I'll go to the same high school as you, Bob.
Great!
Wait for me there, Catherine.
When his opinion prevailed, Bob showed a sweet smile. It was a reward for me, and I kept pushing myself just to see that smile. When I told my parents which high school I wanted to go to, my mom openly showed her disappointment in me.
Why are you going to such a boring high school? That's right. You should graduate from a decent college and get a job with a future.
My dad added. But I insisted, all my friends are going to that high school, using a poor lie. In reality, my friends had chosen better high schools. And I knew there was no benefit in matching my choices to Bob's poor academic performance. Lying to my parents like this was a first for me. I was torn between feeling guilty towards my parents and keeping my promise to Bob.
I'm disappointed in you,
they said, ending the conversation. From the next day, my parents visibly started treating me differently. In contrast, Bob was in a great mood.
Catherine, thank you. Now we'll be together in high school too.
Yeah. I was confused about whether I was doing the right thing or making a mistake. Bob was smiling. All that mattered was that. After starting high school, I frequently had troubles with my parents.
I spent too much on in-game purchases this month.
Is the game that interesting?
Yeah, it's really fun. You should try it, Catherine.
Maybe I will. The casual game I started in such a light-hearted manner turned out to be the beginning of new troubles. Normally, I wouldn't have cared so much, because I never really liked the game. The problem was its friend feature. Players cooperated in events, and Bob invited me to the game for this purpose.
Catherine, your character is weak. Pull more gotcha to strengthen our team.
I'm sorry. Following Bob's directions in the game, our characters did get stronger. But the spending increased too. My mom noticed.
Not only did you go to a bad school, now you're wasting money on games. What are you doing? But my friends. If those are your friends, you're better off alone. Don't say that.
For the first time, I talked back to my mom. I wouldn't let her say Bob wasn't good for me.
Talking back to your parents.
Mom looked angry and sad, a complex expression on her face. Since then, I hardly spoke with my parents. When I discussed this with Bob, he showed his usual smile. That's fine. It's your life, Catherine. Is it? I wondered if Bob saying that was appropriate. Was I really living my life? Or was I just following Bob's orders, forced into a life convenient for him? By the time I realized this, it was too late. After graduating from high school, I chose to work. My parents had completely given up on me. I couldn't even think of going to college. Especially since Bob seemed against the idea. Catherine, you wouldn't betray me, right? Yeah. I nodded as usual. Bob had dropped out of high school. There's no need for me at school after Catherine graduates. But in reality, it was due to a conflict with a teacher. No company wanted to hire Bob with only a middle school education. At best, he could only find part-time jobs, and even there, he often caused trouble. That boss is so arrogant, it's annoying. Did you quit your job again? I asked, feeling somewhat fed up. By this time, Bob and I had started living together. After my parents found out about my relationship with Bob, they finally kicked me out. Bob, who had a strained relationship with his family, moved into my apartment with just his belongings.
It's the start of a fun life together.
Yeah. Bob seemed genuinely happy. But I was just forcing a smile. I knew it would just be more trouble. People around me said I should break up with Bob. He's just a freeloader now. He's trying to work, at least. He wants to. But I saw him skip work and go to the gaming arcade.
Who said that?
My voice was cold. My friends gradually started distancing themselves from me. I knew. I knew they were right. Bob wasn't thinking about my happiness. But I thought I couldn't be happy without Bob. I really believed that. Then it happened.
I can't marry an old lady. I'm gonna find a younger fiancé, so our engagement is off, lol.
Bob took off the engagement ring from my finger and declared.
Bob.
I was out of my mind. Bob's smile was no longer sweet. It was a nasty smirk, looking down on me. Catherine, you're 32, right? Not young, clearly.
I'm only a year older than you.
I tried a futile retort. Bob was always dismissive about his own age. He simply wanted to switch to a younger, cuter girl. And Bob had already cheated on me with several girls. He was good-looking and knew how to charm. Seducing girls was easy for him. The relationships didn't last because of Bob's selfish nature and financial unreliability. I was the witness to that. The biggest victim of Bob's deceit. So, thanks for everything. Bye, Catherine. Bob waved his hand flippantly. The ring he had taken from my finger gripped in it. I wondered who he intended to give that ring to next. I thought to myself. And then, I made a decision. Bob. I won't let you have your way anymore. Goodbye, Bob. Oh, you understand? That's my Catherine, always got why I liked you. Is that so? It seemed like Bob's feelings for me were a thing of the past. Maybe they never existed in the first place. Now that you understand, please leave.
Huh?
Forgot? I'm the one who rented this apartment.
Ah, I see.
So you're kicking me out, huh? Bob said with a thin smile. Bob smirked, thinking I was joking. I smiled too. And those clothes.
What? Everything you're wearing, I bought it. Well, keep the underwear. But return the rest. I'll sell them to a thrift store. You're telling me to leave in just my underwear? Bob shouted. I must have at least one outfit I bought myself. Nope. I have the receipts if you need proof. Receipts? Yes, from the clothing store. I kept all of them, along with every bill, groceries, utilities, everything. What the heck? Bob's voice grew pitiful. You don't need to take the toothbrush, right? And since we have 2 sets of dishes, I'll throw them out. Then at least give me. No. You can only take what you bought yourself. Bob looked out the window in despair. It's snowing outside. Yeah. I nodded calmly. Bob, shivering, begged. At least let me keep the jacket, please. Fine. You can wear what's underneath. But not the jacket. It's a brand worth good money. I smiled emptily. The jacket I bought for Bob. He had insisted, and I had indulged him. Just a year ago. The black long coat looked great on him. At that time, I was so proud. You're a devil. I'm fine with being a devil. I'm just an old lady anyway. I waved my hand at the door and closed it, thinking I need to change the locks soon. I had taken back the spare key from Bob, but he might still have another one. You'll regret treating me this way. I'll never see you again. I heard Bob's parting words. I slumped down, holding my head. I was anxious. I had impulsively broken up with him, but could I really come to hate Bob? After all the time we spent together. Bob would no longer be in my coming days. I had lost his smile forever. I lifted my head, leaning against the door, and began to laugh. Bob is gone, he's really gone. I finally felt free. There was a sense of relief and fulfillment. Bob had long ceased to be a romantic interest. I was just with him out of inertia. Being with Bob meant constantly worrying about upsetting him, making it impossible to be myself. I understand that clearly now. I don't need you anymore, Bob. This turned out to be just right. He left on his own. A single tear ran down my cheek. Ah! I realized then. I had written him off long ago. He was nothing but harmful to me, and I was surprised at my own weakness for having turned a blind eye. And yet, there was a slight feeling of loneliness. But that feeling would end today. Get ready for tomorrow, Bob. I looked around the empty room and murmured. Let's do this. I was switching gears. It was going to be busy. The first thing to do was definitely changing the locks. The landlord said, "It's good you broke up. Your boyfriend was not well liked in the apartment." Is that so? I accepted the words more calmly than I thought I would. The old me would have been furious. Any negative talk about Bob was unbearable. But now, it's different. Like a cloudy sky clearing up rapidly, my thoughts were also becoming clear. Please take care of the lock change. Sure, I'll handle it, replied the landlord with a firm nod. As I was halfway up the stairs back to my apartment, another tenant stopped me. Excuse me. What can I do for you? You were engaged to Bob, right? It's ex-fiancé now. Oh, so you broke up. The tenant furrowed her brows in distress. After looking around, she, appearing to be about a college student's age, said, "Please come to my apartment." Why? I've been harassed by him. He spread rumors that we're dating, and his stalking has gotten worse. It's scary. Therefore, she said, looking intently at me, clasping her hands together as if in prayer. He said he'd marry me after breaking up with you. What? But you seem normal, not like the terrible woman he described. He spoke ill of me? I couldn't hide my dismay. Guided by her, I visited her room. There, I was told about Bob's disturbing behavior, which was truly disheartening to hear. I knew he sometimes took money from my wallet, but to buy you gifts with it? Yes. He barely works, yet he's always splurging. Turns out, he was stealing from his fiancé's wallet.
I looked up at the ceiling, astounded. While drinking the tea she offered, the woman said,
I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We're both suffering because of the same man. I replied with a wry smile. But now, we need to think about the future. The future? She blinked in surprise. I said, yes. How are we going to deal with Bob now? I shared my ideas with her. And she listened intently, nodding and interjecting occasionally. Then I added something important. I actually knew about you before. What? She looked shocked. It was a natural reaction. Even though we lived in the same apartment, our paths rarely crossed. Our interaction was limited to nodding in the hallways due to different life rhythms. I pulled out a bundle of documents from my shoe. Please don't be upset when you open this. I had all of Bob's affairs investigated by a private detective. What? She looked at me. Her eyes filled with a mix of fear and surprise. I smiled reassuringly, trying to ease her tension. The report said that Bob was the one obsessively fixating on you one-sidedly. Please believe me. I have nothing to do with him. I believe you. Please calm down. Thank you. She sighed in relief. The report clarified that out of 5 women, 3 were in clear romantic relationships with Bob. You and another woman were just being pursued by him. Is that so? There are others suffering the same as me. Emily hung her head, visibly pained. Knowing there were others in similar situations probably evoked empathy and sympathy in her. I leaned in slightly and suggested, shall we meet them? Meet them? Yes, the 3 of us, together with you, can confront Bob. Confront him? But how? Through legal action. I said, emphasizing my words. First, let's consult the police and get a stalking assessment. Bob isn't smart enough to give up easily. We'll have our chance to press charges. To use me as bait to lure him? That's not what I meant. I was flustered. Indeed. It sounded like I was imposing danger on her. As I was about to retract my suggestion, she nodded. I'll do it. Do what? I'll be the bait. If it means defeating him. Are you sure? I felt like I saw a fire in her eyes. Then, from now on, we're allies. Yes. Oh, I'm Emily Johnson, by the way. She introduced herself, a bit belatedly but politely. This introduction led to Emily and me becoming closer. Unaware of our plans, Bob, as expected, continued to press Emily for marriage. I decided it was time to confront Bob. Together with Emily. Seeing me, Bob screamed in shock. What the heck, Emily, why are you with Catherine? We are allies. Emily replied, avoiding his gaze. It's not just us. Why are you all here? Bob exclaimed, bewildered. 4 young and beautiful women appeared. They were all women Bob had pursued. One of them, like Emily, had been a victim of his stalking. And looked at Bob with anger-filled eyes. The other 3 acknowledged they had been in relationships with Bob. Under the pretense of marriage. In essence, all of them had been deceived by Bob. I didn't know you had a fiancé, Bob. It's a misunderstanding. I've already broken up with her. Then what about the other girls? They all seem to think they're going to marry you, including me. Including myself, there were 6 of us women. Among them, a particularly assertive woman was enraged to learn Bob had played with her feelings. When she realized that Bob had deceived her just for fun, she became furiously angry with immense intensity. Now, she was confronting him. Bob, being yelled at by the woman, turned to me with tearful eyes. With tears in his eyes, he said, Catherine, it was you, wasn't it? You told them all. Yes, I did. I replied, tilting my head. But Bob, you're the one who deceived everyone.
Even so, to call them all at once. Help, forgive me.
Bob was surrounded by the other women, each airing their grievances. Everyone had been genuinely in love with Bob. I understood. I had felt the same way. Watching Bob and the women, I felt a mix of pride and strangeness. A year has passed since that incident. Emily and I continued to stay in touch, now visiting each other's apartments.
So, you see.
As I was talking, my smartphone rang. I chose to ignore it, continuing my story. Emily looked puzzled.
Aren't you going to answer that, Catherine? Oh, it's fine. It's nothing important. Really?
Emily blinked in surprise. I smiled wryly, already knowing who was calling. It was Bob.
Bob keeps calling me every time he gets a new girlfriend. Why? He's upset because Ashley tells each new girlfriend about his past. He wants me to make her stop. Oh.
Emily sighed, seeming to expect such behavior from Ashley, who was one of the women confronting Bob that day.
I doubt she'd listen even if I asked her. She's not the type to easily heed others' advice. I guess so.
We shared a bitter laugh. Bob's calls came at all hours. During meals, at work, even while I was with friends.
Enough already.
Once, unable to bear it, I answered his call. Bob sounded desperate.
Please, make her stop. Ashley's making my life hell. You brought this on yourself.
I replied, thinking about the evening's plans. Tonight was a potluck party at Emily's house. My friend Emily and her friends were gathering to enjoy a winter night around a hot pot. Excited for the evening, I wasn't really listening to Bob's complaints. I just said what was on my mind, nothing more.
You made 6 women, including me, unhappy. That's a fact you have to live with. You talk about bearing consequences, but I'm not even dating anyone now. Emily treats me like a stalker. Every time I find a new girlfriend, instead of starting over, thanks to Ashley's interference, they all end up leaving me. I can't help you with that.
Ashley's grudge seemed deep. Even if I tried to stop her, it wouldn't mean much.
Is that all you called for? Just that? What's with your cold response? Don't you feel a bit sorry for me?
No, I don't.
I'm a heartless old lady, remember?
With that, I ended the call. Then, I muttered to myself.
I'm still bothered by being called old.
Surprised by my own reaction. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. That's when I saw him.
Oh. Catherine. Long time no see.
A man was approaching with a smile. At first, I didn't recognize him, but there was a hint of familiarity in his smile. Thanks to that, I was able to recall who he was. Michael?
Mom told me to come by this area. Never thought I'd run into you, Catherine.
The cheerful man was Michael, my childhood friend. Bob kept contacting me even after all that had happened. I was amazed and exasperated by his relentless efforts, but I continued to ignore him. I once changed my phone number, but he even showed up at my apartment, making it hard to turn him away. So, I reluctantly kept the same number and just ignored his calls.
I can have a serious talk with him if you want. No, it's fine. I've decided not to get involved with Bob anymore.
Okay then. Michael seemed a bit disappointed as he nodded. He had returned from New York for a matchmaking meeting arranged by his mother.
How about you, Catherine? No, I'm estranged from my parents. That's harsh.
Michael frowned.
Your ex really messed up your life. I was naive. I dreamed and depended on him.
Now I understand. Bob was the center of my life. Constantly worrying about his mood, living on his words. I'm fine now. I can walk alone.
If you say so.
Michael seemed not fully convinced. To assure him, I pulled out something.
What's that?
My college diploma. I secretly enrolled in an online university while I was with Bob. I didn't want to disappoint my parents who had hopes for me. But I couldn't betray Bob either. So I chose to study in my spare time.
That's surprising.
Michael laughed heartily.
That's good, right? Now you can aim for a career upgrade.
Yeah, maybe. We laughed together, then my phone rang again. Michael scratched his head and said,
Hey, Catherine.
What?
Why don't you date me instead? What are you talking about?
I was dumbfounded. The phone kept ringing.
Just because you don't like arranged meetings. It's not about that.
Michael's voice was serious. His smile had faded, replaced by a look of tension.
I've always had feelings for you.
Are you joking?
I'm serious.
Michael argued with a flushed face. Seeing him like that, I couldn't help but smile genuinely. I eventually gave in to Michael's persistence and started dating him. Being the same age as Michael played a part, but we also connected well in conversation. This was a refreshing change from my time with Bob, where I always had to conform to his ways. The ease and openness I found in my relationship with Michael felt almost surreal. The calls from Bob still continued. Each time the phone rang, Michael would look annoyed or sad. But when I took his hand and smiled, he'd relax.
It's okay. You're here with me.
Catherine. Michael looked momentarily uneasy, but then nodded firmly.
I'll protect you, Catherine. I'm an old lady, you know. If you're an old lady, then I'm an old man. We're the same age.
Right. Maybe those words didn't hold much weight for Michael. But they helped me finally break free from the curse of being called old.
Just paying a rent of $500 a month and acting all high and mighty, huh? Stop the payment then, see if I care.
You might wonder why these words were said, and why I am now preparing to leave the house. The reason goes back a few hours, to a dispute over rent with my mother-in-law. Sean has now started middle school and it's getting pretty expensive. My sister-in-law, Frida, recently started a new part-time job too, juggling multiple roles. Can you help with the rent? However, my mother-in-law just dismissed my job as mere doodling, not taking me seriously at all.
If you don't want to pay, then why don't you just leave?
I was waiting for those words. Finally, the moment had arrived. I silently stood up and headed to my room. Then my sister-in-law came in, taunting me to stop the payment if I dared. If she wants me to stop it so badly, I will. With pleasure. With those words and a smile, I left the house. I vowed to settle this deep-seated grudge of 13 years. I made that vow in my heart. My name is Angelina Foster. I'm 42 years old, a freelance designer working from home. Currently, I live with my in-laws, have a 13-year-old son, and my husband, Ken, is on a business trip abroad. Ken and I met in college. We were from the same high school but never really talked until we joined the same college. We barely interacted since we always selected different classes in the high school. But in college, being in the same lecture gave us a chance to connect, and our friendship blossomed from there. Ken and I built a good relationship and got married when we were both 28. We had been living in a modest but happy apartment, but then fate took a turn. A year into our marriage, at the age of 29, we moved in with my in-laws. The reason was that my father-in-law fell ill and couldn't work, needing care. My mother-in-law had always been a homemaker, and my sister-in-law, Frida, was part-time. Ken, almost begging, asked for my help.
I can't handle this alone. I know it's a lot to ask, but please, I need your help.
How could I say no? When we got married, his family was kind to me. And my own parents had passed away. Since my job allows me to work from home, moving wouldn't be an issue. Therefore, I decided to live with my in-laws, seeing no problem with it. That decision turned out to be a mistake. Living with my in-laws turned into a nightmare. For a few months, Ken was around, but then he said something unexpected. I've got a long-term assignment abroad. It's a construction project, and I'll be going as a trainee supervisor. I'll be back in the US occasionally, but I don't know when I'll be done. I was shocked, but knew this was possible. Since Ken worked for a global corporation and talked about possible overseas assignments in his 30s. Apparently, once assigned, he'd be staying abroad for several years. I agreed to a relationship with the understanding we'd eventually get married, and finally, we made it happen. But it wasn't Ken's fault, just bad timing. I still felt a bit distant from his family, and I was nervous about managing without Ken around. Yet, I had to do it. I braced myself and sent Ken off, but with him gone, my in-laws finally showed their true colors. "Hey, Angelina, can you take care of this?" While I was hanging laundry, my sister-in-law, Frida, casually tossed her just-worn clothes into the washing machine and hit the start button. Another childish way to hassle me in this cold weather. Yes, I was receiving such treatment from my in-laws. And it wasn't just Frida. My parents-in-law also mistook me for some kind of handy housekeeper, adopting an arrogant attitude. "Angelina, you came here as a wife, so it's only natural you do these things. Why can't you handle such simple tasks?" "Ah. I'd love to see what your parents were like." My mother-in-law said this, knowing full well my parents had passed away early due to illness. My father-in-law, too, had health issues due to excessive drinking, which led to his collapse. As a result, he became unable to move his lower body properly. Despite being in a state that required care, he'd make overbearing demands. "Hey, the liquor bottle's empty. This is why I dislike women with no manners or courtesy. Hey, as a wife, it's common sense for you to run to the store and get me a beer or two. I can't walk, so show some consideration." He'd aggressively place the empty bottle on the table and yell at me. This had become my daily life. The kindness of my in-laws had been a facade all along. They had deceived me into marrying into their family, intending to use me as a convenient housekeeper. Ken had been deceived too. I thought about calling Ken so many times, his number appearing on the display. But I didn't want to bother him with my sorrows while he was busy with important work overseas. I kept thinking the in-laws would get tired of their harassment if I didn't react too much. Surely, my in-laws would stop harassing me once they got bored of my lack of reaction. So I endured for a while. But they were relentless and unforgiving. If I cooked, they'd complain it was terrible and dump it in the sink, making me clean the clogged drain. If I ironed clothes, they'd point out a small wrinkle and lecture me for an hour. After a month of this, I couldn't take it anymore. Feeling like I was about to break, I finally called Ken, shaking. "Help me, Ken. I can't take it anymore. I can't bear the daily mistreatment from your family anymore." Ken, initially panicked, regained his composure and said, "I understand. I can't just sit by and work knowing Angelina is in such a state. I can't come back right away, but I'll talk to my boss to see if there's a chance I can return within a month. I'm sorry, right after I suggested living together, I ended up on this assignment." Ken was on my side. Just knowing it, I felt like a relief. Even after I confided in Ken, the harassment from my in-laws continued. "So you ratted to Ken, huh? He called and said not to be mean to you. Can't believe you're painting us as the bad guys." There was still a long time before Ken could return. But he tried to rescue me as best he could, calling his mother and giving her a piece of his mind. But it backfired. My mother-in-law was furious at being scolded by her beloved son, Ken, and naturally, she directed her anger at me. Did she think I wouldn't tell Ken? Even if that was the case, I can confidently say my anger and sadness are justified. I don't want to divorce Ken, whom I love dearly, and I wanted to cherish his family as my own. I never imagined accepting to live with them would lead to such hell. Every day, my mother-in-law constantly nagged and complained, while Frida, my sister-in-law, kept up her petty harassment. My father-in-law was rude and kept drinking despite doctor's orders, making me buy his alcohol and snacks. Moreover, my in-laws had a massive misunderstanding. Like, even I can work a part-time job, but you just stay home, living off Ken? That's just embarrassing. They all seemed to think I wasn't working. Though work from home has become more common, their idea of it is entirely different from mine. For example, a typical work-from-home employee might start their day with a check-in or attend web meetings. But I'm not an employee, I'm a freelance business owner. I work when I want to and take breaks when I don't feel like it. This isn't unusual. A friend of mine who's a freelance writer lives the same way. But to Frida, it seemed like I was just slacking off. She claims she's working part-time, but in reality, she just breezes in for about 4 hours once a week. Of course, she doesn't contribute financially to the household and even takes pocket money from our father-in-law when short. It's debatable who should be more embarrassed. It's clear who should be embarrassed, but I stayed silent to avoid trouble. Despite such treatment, there was a reason I hadn't left yet. It's my pregnancy. A month after that call, Ken finally returned home. He immediately called his parents and sister into the living room for a lecture. But the three of them hardly listened, seemingly just letting it go in one ear and out the other. Probably because they knew Ken would likely go abroad again soon. If they could just get through this, they'd be rid of the bothersome Ken and could use me freely again. To them, Ken was nothing more than an ATM or a convenient wife-bringer. It hurt to hear my loved ones belittled, but I remained silent. After Ken's lecture, sister-in-law puffed up her cheeks and complained. Like, what kind of husband doesn't come back from overseas when his wife's pregnant? That comment made Ken turn to me in surprise. I'm sorry for keeping quiet. Right after you left the US, I started feeling unwell for unknown reasons. Recently, I decided to visit the hospital, and it turns out I'm pregnant. I ran into Frida right as I was leaving the clinic near the station. I hadn't intended for my in-laws to find out. I was overjoyed about the pregnancy, but if I mentioned it, Ken would surely worry and rush back. He had already managed to get permission for an unplanned return. I didn't want to hinder his career further. So, I planned to tell only Ken in secret after his return, but it was unexpected that Frida saw me leaving the clinic. When Frida saw me coming out of the clinic, she approached with a grin, saying, "Wow, you're pregnant, huh? Ken's the eldest, so that kid's gonna be the heir, right? I'll make sure to report this to Mom and Dad." That very day, my in-laws found out about my pregnancy. But that didn't change anything. They continued to treat me like a housekeeper as usual. Ken got even more angry when he heard, but until the day he returned abroad, the three of them showed no signs of remorse. It's impossible to leave Angelina here. He suggested moving me somewhere else. But I politely declined. I appreciate the offer, and it's probably the best solution. But I'm at my limit. After everything I've been through, I refuse to just run away and end it like this. I'm grateful for your concern, but can you wait a little longer? Of course, Ken objected. But my mind was made up. That feeling had taken root deep within me. After Ken went back abroad, I pretended to obediently follow my in-laws' orders. Once they knew the baby in my belly was a boy, the prospective heir, my parents-in-law became a bit nicer. Though, that didn't stop them from hurling insults at me. Frida seemed unhappy with their slightly softer attitude. Because she's pregnant, are Mom and Dad going soft on her? She should carry these heavy boxes. She pointed to a cardboard box my mother-in-law had ordered. But my mother-in-law, with a gentle smile, said, "The baby in her belly is definitely Ken's, right? It's a boy and an important heir, so let's be nice for now. Once she's done giving birth, we can treat her like a housekeeper again." Hearing this, my sister-in-law smiled contentedly. What a rotten family, I thought, determined not to lose to them. I endured the pregnancy and successfully gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Then began a whirlwind of sleepless nights, and before I knew it, 13 years had passed. I was 42, and my son was a 13-year-old middle schooler. Ken returned home occasionally, but recently, he finally finished his assignment and was set to return to the US permanently. At last, I decided it was time to put into action the plan I had been concocting for years. As I was preparing to leave the house with my packed belongings, someone approached me from behind. There were my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They looked down on me with their usual condescending smiles. Then, out of the blue, they said something like this. Acting all high and mighty over a mere $500 rent. Stop paying it then, see if I care. You might wonder why they said this, and why I am now preparing to leave the house. It goes back a few hours, to a dispute over rent with my mother-in-law. Sean, my son, is already a middle schooler, and it's costing quite a bit. He joined the rugby team, and equipping him for it was expensive. Frida recently started a new part-time job and is juggling multiple roles. Can you help with the rent? Sean is my son's name. Then my mother-in-law got angry, saying not to fuss over such a trivial amount as rent. The rent for this house is just $500, right? And you can't even pay that? How much more of Ken's money do you plan to stash away? Always playing or doodling on the computer, living the good life. If you don't want to pay, then why don't you just leave? I had been waiting for those words. Or rather, I had led her to say them. I didn't retort to my mother-in-law. Instead, I calmly stood up and silently headed to my room. Over these 13 years, I had gradually decluttered, preparing to leave the house at any moment, so I hardly had any personal belongings left. A slightly larger carry-on suitcase was all I needed. While I was packing, Frida, having heard the conversation, came in and taunted me, daring me to stop the payment. If that's what they wanted, I'd do it. With pleasure, I said, smiling, and left the house. I was determined to fulfill the deep-seated grudge of these past 13 years. With that vow in my heart, I headed to the condo I had previously contracted. I had already discussed this with my son, Sean. So he came to the condo without hesitation and just started doing his homework as usual, which made me laugh. His adaptability, perhaps inherited from his father, Ken, who was used to living abroad, was remarkable. Thinking about this, I took my next step. As Frida had dared, I stopped all the payments, calling the electricity company and all other utility services. When I was told that they would be cut off from tomorrow, I silently cheered. What my in-laws didn't know was that I had been paying for all of the household utilities. I was, of course, the contract holder. When we first started living together, Ken paid the bills, but when he was about to go abroad, we discussed changing the contract holder. Since it's typically the resident who should be the one. So I suggested, since I'd be taking care of them and earning a decent income, to transfer all the utilities to my name. Those two didn't realize that by daring me to stop paying the rent, they were actually losing their electricity and water. Because they assumed Ken was paying for everything from abroad. But Frida had clearly said, stop the payments. So, I stopped all of them. I was looking forward to the next day. As I fell asleep with these thoughts, I slept soundly for the first time in 13 years, not waking up until morning. It was blissful to sleep so deeply. The next day, after sending Sean off, I was working at home when, as expected, my mother-in-law called. What's going on? The electricity and water, everything stopped. You complained to Ken again, didn't you? How can you not be ashamed of such a mean prank? While stifling a laugh at her loud and lively tone, I calmly replied. You and Frida were the ones who said it, right? Stop the payments. Did you know that I was covering all the utility bills for the house? Why am I being scolded when I just did what you asked? Hearing this, my mother-in-law fell silent. She probably never imagined that everything was in my name. Of course, it wasn't just the electricity and water. I had also contacted the gas company and asked the real estate to bill the rent to my in-laws since I wouldn't be living there anymore. Soon, they would be getting a call from the real estate agency. As I was thinking this, my father-in-law, panicking, said over the phone. The real estate just called asking who's going to pay the next rent. What's going on? The electricity and water are out, and now the rent too. Did Ken do something? I couldn't help but laugh at their panic. That's right, they always ridiculed my work as just playing or doodling. After a brief silence, my mother-in-law finally spoke up. You say you paid for everything,
but ultimately it's from Ken's salary, right? As if you have any right to act all superior. This is why I can't stand low-level women. That really got under my skin. I've always worked, never relying solely on Ken. It was about time I let my ignorant mother-in-law know who I really am. I earn money from my drawings, you know. I'm also skilled in web design, so I make my income from that. My annual earnings exceed $200,000. If you call that low-level, then you must be quite extraordinary. I could tell my mother-in-law gasped in disbelief. She couldn't believe that. The daughter-in-law she looked down upon, thinking I was just playing, earned that much.
Wait, such lies won't work with me.
Still in denial, I told her to check the company I founded, where my name, Angelina Foster, was listed as the CEO. Frida, who was apparently listening on speaker, checked and expressed her shock.
No way! It's true, Angelina Foster is listed as the CEO. Why did you keep this a secret?
It wasn't a secret, they just assumed I was unemployed. They underestimated me, not knowing I was supporting their lifestyle. I endured these 13 years because I had Ken and Sean with me. I could have run away, but that would only make me a laughingstock to that unreasonable family. So, I decided to endure until Ken's return and plan my grand revenge. The plan was to contract a condo and leave the house as soon as Ken's return was confirmed. I could have cut off the utilities immediately, but then they would spitefully say, "Using your financial control to do whatever you want, huh?" Knowing their nature, I decided to use it to my advantage. I just needed to make it look like they told me to stop the payments. If they told me to stop the payments, I could do so without blame, making them regret their words. I was pondering how to create that situation, but they fell for it easily and told me to stop the payments. I still remember Frida's smug face when she confidently told me to do so. It was more amusing than hurtful, knowing how things would unfold. Realizing their mistake, my in-laws started groveling. "Oh, so that's how it was. Maybe you didn't tell us because you were considerate? If we knew you were paying, we would have treated you accordingly." I almost snapped again. Basically, if I were a non-earning housewife, their treatment would have been justified. Such an attitude is unacceptable. Unable to apologize properly and letting their pride speak, my mother-in-law only infuriated me more.
I don't want to hear such excuses. I stopped all payments as you and Frida told me to, and I have no intention of returning. Ken, Sean, and I will live as a family of 3. I refuse to live with such an unreasonable family anymore. Please take care of yourselves.
With that, I hung up the phone. Afterwards, there were several calls from my in-laws, but I found it too bothersome to deal with them and blocked their numbers. The once incessant ringing stopped abruptly. Even just that felt like a release from stress. All that was left was to wait for Ken's return and give the tough lesson to those 3. With this in mind, I enjoyed the brief peace. Finally, Ken came back. His skin was a bit tanned from working outdoors, contrasting with his bright white smile. But his eyes were firm and determined.
"I've kept you waiting too long. Let's go."
I nodded firmly and we drove to the dreaded in-laws' house. Arriving, we rang the doorbell and my mother-in-law, with hollow eyes, answered. Her skin was rough and worn, her hair unkempt and roots showing. It was clear signs she hadn't been to a salon recently. When I was contributing financially, she had the luxury of indulgences, but now, with only an unemployed couple and a part-time daughter, life was different. This was part of my plan. People accustomed to luxury on someone else's dime find it hard to revert to their old financial habits. For my in-laws, who had been living off the sweet life for 13 years, the current situation must be unbearable. Slowly, my mother-in-law raised her eyes to look at us. Her eyes regained focus as she stared at us, opening and closing her mouth as if wanting to say something. So I asked her why she ended up like this. Suddenly, she burst into anger.
"It's your fault. You kept quiet about earning money, deceiving us. How dare you? Since you left, we've had no money but expenses keep piling up, and I'm stuck caring for your father-in-law.
Frida is useless, just playing around. How could our children be so disrespectful and infuriating?
She stubbornly refused to admit her own faults. Typical of her, pride as high as Everest. While I was internally scoffing at this, Ken quickly retorted, "I'll return those words to you. It's ridiculous to think children should unconditionally serve their parents. You're the ones who are wrong. Remember how many times I warned you about Frida being a freeloader? Yet, each time, you both said a woman can get married, so it doesn't matter. And now, we have a 40-plus-year-old who can't hold down a proper job and just lazes around at home." My mother-in-law, speechless at Ken's rebuke, just trembled and couldn't respond. She was skilled at shifting blame. Maybe she was always figuring out how to make herself look innocent. Seeing Frida's behavior, it was clear the apple didn't fall far from the tree. As we argued at the doorstep, my mother-in-law's phone rang. She checked the display with a click of her tongue and paled. It was the police.
"Frida got into trouble for Dine Dash and is at the police station. What is she doing?"
At the moment, only my in-laws were home, as Frida had gone out with friends. Apparently, she went to dinner assuming someone else would pay. The person who invited her was an old middle school classmate who had returned for a visit. It seems the person didn't know Frida was a part-time. After the meal, when it was suggested they each pay for what they ate, Frida lost her temper, insisting the one who invited should pay. Such a logic doesn't hold up. Adults should pay for what they consume. But Frida, assuming she would be treated, ordered expensive items and downed fine wine, expecting someone else to cover her bill. Why should anyone be responsible for such behavior? Despite clearly being in the wrong, Frida claimed ignorance and fled the restaurant without paying. She was promptly caught by the manager and reported to the police. Ken and I couldn't help but chuckle at such an appalling outcome. My mother-in-law trembled as she heard from the police the amount Frida had racked up.
Ordering over $400 in wine by the bottle at an Italian restaurant in the middle of the day. And then eating enough to bring the bill over $800. Impossible, we don't have that kind of money now.
$800 may not seem like much. But it was a fortune for my in-laws in their current state. When she looked to us for help, I chuckled and firmly said, "We won't pay for it." At those words, my mother-in-law looked as if she had been plunged into despair, collapsing right there. When we arrived at the scene, Frida's friend from earlier had temporarily covered her bill, and the police had already left. Naturally, the friend was demanding reimbursement from my mother-in-law. Just when I thought there would be more drama, my mother-in-law surprisingly quickly withdrew money from an ATM and handed it over to Frida's friend. I was wondering why she gave in so easily when Ken whispered the reason to me.
"That person is the daughter of the president of the company Dad used to work for. Frida hardly had any friends, and if she mentioned a middle school classmate, it had to be her. She's from a well-known family in our hometown. Defying her would ruin their own reputation, so it seems they had enough sense to consider that."
Looking again at my mother-in-law, she was pathetically begging Frida's friend for forgiveness. After a brief reprimand, the friend left with a swish of her long hair. Given her family's standing, Frida's few remaining friends would likely abandon her too. Frida, receiving a stern warning from the restaurant manager, looked shocked to see us there. "Why are you guys here?" she stammered, covering her face and starting to cry. Perhaps embarrassed to be seen in her neglected state, just like my mother-in-law. Seeing Frida, who had once looked down on me, in such a state was quite satisfying. Ken, sharing my thoughts, fixed a stern gaze on her. Feeling even more ashamed under his scrutiny, Frida broke down crying, attracting odd glances from others. But considering her recent Dine Dash attempt and having her mother pay for it, it was no surprise. Frida always cared about appearances, especially about beauty, which I knew from living together for 13 years. Frida always cared about appearances, especially about beauty, which I knew from living together for 13 years. She'd spend her money on questionable supplements and weird mirrors from shady salons, never contributing to the household. Ultimately, it was all for nothing, a complete waste of money. Finally, realizing their mistakes, my mother-in-law and Frida knelt before us. "I'm sorry, it was my fault. I won't mistreat Angelina again. Please, come back home." I could tell she was speaking from the bottom of her heart. Her high pride begging to such an extent showed their desperate situation. Yet, Frida remained unapologetic, insisting,
"I did nothing wrong. I won't end up like Mom. I won't apologize."
It wasn't me or Ken who lost it. It was my mother-in-law.
"Enough, Frida. Don't come back home. Consider that $800 as severance. If you had worked properly or got married, none of this would have happened."
My mother-in-law unleashed a torrent of harsh words at Frida. Frida was stunned into silence, never having been spoken to like that by her once doting mother. This family's bond was so fragile that it crumbled at the last moment. Instead of supporting each other as a family should in such times, they only cared about themselves, blaming everyone but themselves. Their pitiful and ridiculous display compelled me to put an end to this farce.
"Everything you're saying is coming right back at you like a boomerang. If you hadn't mistreated me from the start, none of this would have happened. If you and your husband had guided Frida properly, this outcome could have been avoided. Am I wrong? Well, even if I am, this is the reality you have to accept now."
My words silenced them completely. Unable to say anything but complaints or apologies, they probably decided it was better not to say anything at all. What awaited the three of them was an endless hell. I endured 13 years, but only because I had a family who cherished me. A group like them, lacking even the bond of family, couldn't hope to live in harmony and support each other. They were doomed to wander in eternal hell. Compared to the pain and humiliation I endured, their troubles probably seemed trivial. Without it, they couldn't survive, but her past actions wouldn't just disappear. After that, my mother-in-law seems to have started working part-time. If she doesn't do that, life will be difficult. But there's no way that what she's done up until now will become irrelevant. My father-in-law collapsed again. Naturally, the cause was his continued drinking despite being advised by doctors to stop. Buying cheap liquor in large bottles, his condition worsened, leading to a long hospital stay. He complained about the hospital food being bland, but my mother-in-law had bigger problems. It seems my father-in-law, unable to work due to his bad legs, was at least expected to stay home. However, his hospitalization and surgery added a significant burden to their household expenses. In frustration, my mother-in-law resorted to using the money my father-in-law had been secretly saving up. Hearing this, my father-in-law naturally became angry and argued, but he was scolded by the person in the next bed, saying, "Both of you are at fault," and he apparently quieted down. Now, he's living a subdued life in the hospital, spending his days in a daze without any freedom. My mother-in-law, working tirelessly for hospital and living expenses, eventually collapsed herself and ended up in the hospital, a case of ironic reversal. Sometimes they ask to see their grandson, but would a child who grew up watching his grandmother mistreat his mother ever like her? Sean completely ignores them, which was the final blow for my mother-in-law. After being kicked out, Frida got arrested for stealing money at her job. Unrepentant, she justified her theft by saying she had no money, so it was only natural. She stole a significant amount and it wasn't the first time, so she ended up with a prison sentence. Her downfall was almost comical, fitting for someone like her. Ken, Sean, and I bought a condo and started living there. Even with money, we didn't want to become arrogant like my in-laws. Using them as a cautionary tale, we maintained our humble lifestyle. Though I lacked athletic ability, Sean, being the son of a former track team captain like Ken. Sean has become skilled enough in baseball to participate in the national championships, and he has enrolled in a high school. He seems to be enjoying his days there. As the mother of an only son, I'll one day be a mother-in-law. When that time comes, I'm determined to be kind, not interfere but offer support when needed, a stark contrast to my own experience.